This was a really important chapter. As I said at the beginning of this series, after the alphabet, it's the issue of inflection that causes the most trouble for people who want to use the better biblical study tools. So understanding inflection is just critical if we're really going to get proficient at this level of the Greek primer. So what I want to do in the screencast is to spend a little more time just looking at examples of inflection and kind of reviewing what we've already discussed. So go ahead and download the workspace file for the lesson and then start up Accordance. This is a very basic screen designed to help us do some reading, not a whole lot else. Let's begin by looking up cosmos. This is the noun that means world. And let's make sure we understand how cosmos is inflecting in different verses. So the search text is set to the GNT. We're going to search for words. And so hit a tab to select the space and type in cosmos. And do the search. Cosmos appears 186 times in the New Testament in 151 different verses. Now that's a few more verses than I want to deal with. So what I'd like to do is to limit the search just to the Gospel of John. And there's different ways that you can do this, but here's one of them. You can do a Command-Shift-A to get the command and, or you could have just typed it if you wanted. And then a Command-Shift-R for the range, and the range is to limit the search to John. That's just one quick way to do it. Do your search. Now we're going to be dealing with 78 examples of cosmos in 57 verses. That may be a little more manageable. Now as we look down through these verses, you can see cosmos inflecting. Here in the first one, in verse 9, it's cosmon. And you can see this is the form of the word in the phrase into the world. Go down to verse 10. And it's cosmo. There's that little iota subscript under there. It's in a phrase that means in the world. And now you go down to the next one, it's cosmos. There's the actual lexical form being used in a verse. We're going to come back to that in just a second. Go on down to verse 29, and it's cosmu, and it's in a phrase meaning of the world. So you can see that cosmos sometimes occurs in the text as its lexical form, cosmos, but it can also inflect to cosmon, or to cosmo, or to cosmu. Well, let's do one more thing in this search. I want to limit the search to just the form cosmos. In other words, I want to find every time in the biblical text that the actual lexical form occurs. I'll show you the shortcut for doing it. Go up under Search, go down to Tag, and choose Noun, since cosmos is a noun. And what I want to do is I want to limit the search just to the nominative. So you select that option and say OK. And what it does, it puts in the code the at, and then inside the brackets, noun nominative. That's just Accordance nomenclature for limiting the search to every example of cosmos functioning only in the nominative case. Do your search, and now every example of cosmos is cosmos. This is what I wanted to make clear, and I wasn't sure it was really clear in the lesson. In the lesson, I defined the lexical form, or the lemma, as the dictionary form. In other words, this is the form that the noun is going to take when it occurs in the dictionary. And for nouns, that's the nominative singular. It's the nominative case, and its number is going to be singular. That's the dictionary form of a word. But I also define the inflected form as the form that the dictionary form takes when it actually occurs in a sentence. What I perhaps wasn't clear enough about in the lesson was a scenario where the person is writing the Greek out and he needs to use cosmos as a nominative singular. In other words, he wants to use cosmos as the subject of a verb, and he's only going to talk about one world, so it has to be nominative singular. Now, in that situation, what I was defining as the inflected form is in fact identical to the dictionary form. Or to say it another way, there will be times when you will find the dictionary form in the text, but that's just because the author wants to use a nominative singular form. So I didn't want to imply that the form you see in the dictionary can never occur in the text. It can. And in fact, it often does. Okay? So as you look through these different verses, you'll see that every single one is nominative, because that's what we limited the search to. And they just happen to be singular because John is not talking about plural worlds anywhere around here. Now, there is another way to limit cosmos to the nominative, and in fact, the nominative singular, and that's through the use of quotation marks. So if you erase the first part of the search, and then type double quote, K-O-S-M-O-S, double quote, and then do your search, you'll notice that you get exactly the same verse selection. The quotation marks mean search for the form cosmos. Don't search for the word cosmos, regardless of its form, but only search for this one particular form. So, for example, let's say you knew that the plural was cosmoi, omicron, iota, and you only wanted to see the nominative plural forms. Then you change the sigma to an iota, and you get this pane coming down that tells you that cosmoi never occurs in John. Okay, never talks about world in the plural. Interesting. Well, let's do this with a verb. So let's go back and select this search box, and then let's type in agapao. A-G-A-P-A-W. The W is the omega. Go ahead and do your search. And you notice that agapao occurs 143 times. And we're searching in the New Testament. Now let me show you perhaps an easier way to limit your search, because this would be important. Let's say you were preaching a sermon series on John, and you really wanted to keep all your word studies to how John uses the language. And what you do is you go up here where it says New Testament, and then go down and define range. We want a new range, and we're going to call that range Gospel of John. And then in the definition field, we need to tell it what book or books of the New Testament we want to search when we choose this range. Well, it's just John. You could, if you wanted, to click verify to make sure you spelled it right. That's kind of handy if you're doing like a range of chapters or a range of verses and you want to make sure you got it just right. But anyway, go ahead and click update. And then I like to keep these search ranges in a logical order. So I would take this option and I would click the down arrow. So it's Matthew, John, Gospels. Again, you can do it any way you want. Click the update and then the red button to make it go away. Now you notice that we're only going to search in the Gospel of John. So do your search again. Now we're down to 37. So in the Gospel of John, John uses the verb agapao 37 times in 27 different verses. But let's limit this search even a little further. So go back up to search and go down to tag verb. And let's tell it we only want to see examples of agapao that are occurring as a present, active, indicative. Those terms may not all make sense to you right now, but they will in just a little bit. Then go ahead and click OK and redo your search. Now we're down to 5 hits. In other words, John uses the verb agapao in the present tense, present active indicative, only 5 times. Well, let's go through and look at some of these inflections. In John 3:35, John is writing that the Father loves the Son. When you do your mouse over on agapa, you notice there's an iota subscript. Again, you don't know what that means, but accordance does. And you check it out. It means that this is the form of the verb. This is the inflected form of agapao When it occurs as a third person singular, so you know that the subject is he, she, or it, and in the present active indicative. Now you remember we talked about linkages, and there's two ways that a verb is linked to its subject. One is that it's going to agree with its subject in person and number, so we know that the subject of agapao is a third person singular. But we also know that the other linkage is that the subject has to be in the nominative case. Well, if you do a mouse over to the word in front of it, pater, you'll see that it is in fact a singular nominative. So the suggestion is not because pater comes in front of agapa, but because it is nominative singular and it's third person. The suggestion is that pater is in fact the subject of agapa, which of course it is. So it means the Father loves the Son, and all things he has given in the hand of him, has given into his hands. But this is one example of inflection. Go down to verse 15, and you have agapas, alpha, iota subscript, sigma. You check your instant details box, and you can see that this is a second person singular. So if you go back through the first part of verse 15 looking for the subject, your search is in vain. You're not going to find it. Simon Ioannou can't be the subject because it's not second person, it's third person. So this is an example of how Greek can contain the subject inside the verb. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus says to Simon Peter, Simon Peter, you love me more than these? And you can see from the punctuation that it's a question mark. So in English, we would say, do you love me more than these? So although the Simon Ioannou is in fact who the you is, grammatically, they are not the subject of the verb. You is the subject of the verb and is contained in the inflected form. I don't want to go too far down this road, but I just want you to keep seeing how inflection functions. Now, I should point out that for those of you that have not been able to purchase the Greek text, you are going to be limited in what you're going to be able to see at this point. Go to my translation in verse 35 and do a mouse over on loves. If you have not purchased the GNT text, what you're seeing in the instant details is the basic dictionary information. In other words, the gloss, the basic meaning of this word is loves. Its GK number is 26, and its dictionary form is agapao in both Greek and transliteration. If you have purchased the GNT, there's a second line underneath it. And what that second line is showing you is the inflected information. So the first line is dictionary information, lemmas, and the second line is inflected information. So the inflected form, in other words, the form that agapao actually takes in John 3:35 is agapa with an iota subscript. Transliterated, agapa, it's a verb, it's third singular, present active indicative. The more I think about this, the more I would really encourage you all, even at the Greek primer level, to have purchased the GNT text. This is just a lot of information that will help you get into better Bible resources. Now, what's interesting is that if you have purchased the GNT text, you don't even have to have it showing in the window to be able to use the inflected information. In fact, let's just get rid of the GNT text for a second here. And now do the mouse over on loves in my translation, and there's all of the inflected information. It's actually drawing it from the GNT text. That's where all the parsing resides. So if you don't want to have the Greek showing on the screen, you don't have to. You can get rid of it. And if you have a Strong's Bible, the mouse overs will still show you the inflected information in the instant details box. So whether it's my translation or another Strong's Bible, you're still going to get that inflected information if you have the GNT installed. But let's go back and reload the GNT. So you go over here, make it a parallel text. I'm going to move it over to the left where it was. I want to do another search, again, just to illustrate some more things about inflection. And these are all present tense forms of agapao. I want to switch into a past time. One of the past tenses in Greek is called the aorist. So select the word present and type in the word aorist, A-O-R-I-S-T, and do your search. You still have the dictionary form in the search box. You still have agapao, and you can use that for comparisons. Look at John 3:16. For in this way, agape sin. Notice how much the word has changed, and we've talked about this before. The initial alpha has gone to an eta. The final alpha has also gone to an eta. And then you have that sigma epsilon nu. The etas and the sigma are telling you that you've switched to the aorist tense, to a past time. And then the epsilon nu indicates that it's a third person singular. And so the subject of agapesin has to be third person singular and has to be in the nominative, which of course that's theos. So it's God loved the world. Now it's interesting, in this verse you have a singular subject. Go down to verse 19, see how the form's different? It's agapesin. Sigma epsilon has changed to sigma alpha. How come? Well, if you do your mouse over, you'll see that agapesin, alpha nu, is a third person plural. Well, that means the subject of the verb in verse 19 is plural. So what you're looking for is a word in the nominative that is third plural, and that would be anthropoi. Now, kosmon, for example, couldn't be the subject because it's singular and it's not nominative, but anthropoi is plural and nominative, so it's the subject of the verb agapesin, so that the people loved darkness rather than light. Now again, let me emphasize, you don't need to be memorizing this information, but you need to really understand what inflection is. That inflection can change the form of a word, in this case agapao, based on its meaning and function in the sentence. And so it's going to go to present or past or future or different tenses depending upon its meaning. And it's going to have different persons and numbers in the personal endings depending upon its meaning. In other words, depending upon the subject of the verb. And all of that together is called agreement. That the verb has to agree with its subject in person and number, and the subject has to agree with the verb in that it has to be in the nominative case. Well, let's look at one more passage. Let's do a verse search. So we're going to go up and choose verses, and let's look at Matthew 6:33. One of my more favorite verses in the Bible. A verse that I try to keep in the forefront of my mind to prioritize my days and my weeks and my years. Let's just read through this together. Okay, let's read Matthew 6:33. And we'll read it in Greek. Zeteta, do it out loud with me. Zeteta de proton tein basileon tu theou kai tein dikaiasunein autou kai tauta panta prostithesetai humin. All right, got to keep reading this stuff, have to keep getting comfortable with it. And we can go back and talk about the meaning of each words. Zeteta is a form you haven't seen yet. It's an imperative, and it's a second person plural. So Jesus is still addressing the group, and he tells the group, seek. And then de is a funny word. De is a word that's called a postpositive. We'll do a lot more of this in functional Greek, by the way, the third video series. But de is called a postpositive, which means it can't be the first word in the Greek sentence. But we usually, in English, translate these as the first words in our translations. So it's you all seek first the kingdom of God. And the brackets around tou theou is just the Greek text way of saying that some Greek manuscripts have tou theou, some don't have tou theou. But that's a whole debate for functional Greek. We won't get into that. And you notice when you go on a mouse over on tain that nothing is selected in my translation. That's because this particular word can't be translated. Again, languages are not codes, they're not exact equivalents, and especially this article, this is the word ha, right? This word sometimes is performing a specific grammatical function or something like that that simply doesn't come into English. And Dad and I tried to make our translation helpful for people who are wanting to learn a little Greek. And so we didn't feel the need to translate every single word when in fact any translator knows that it can't be translated, that it can't come into English. So dikaiosune is righteousness, autou of him. Greek puts possessives normally after the word they relate to. So the righteousness of him is his righteousness. And these things, all, in other words, all of these things, and it's a future passive, will be given to you. So here back in zeteta, you have an example of how Greek doesn't need the subject explicitly stated. It's comfortable putting the subject in the verb, especially if it doesn't involve any ambiguity of meaning, and there wouldn't be any in this case. So the you is in the te, don't need an actual word you. But the interesting thing is the verb prostithesetai. It will be given to you. Now I should mention, just in the interest of inflection, that what's going on here, if you look down at the lexical form, you can see the lexical form is prostithemi. Well, this word has been really modified, hasn't it? It's been really inflected. And the theta, eta, sigma is telling you that it's future passive, and the etai is telling you that it's a third person singular. So the subject has to be third plural, but the meaning of the verb is future passive. And so the verb inflects in order to get that across. It will be given to you. What will be given? Well, what's the subject? Well, the subject is tauta, because you'll notice that tauta is, well, this is interesting, isn't it? It is a nominative, but it's a nominative plural. And you go, wait a minute, prostithesetai is singular, tauta is plural. Tauta can't be the subject of the verb then. This gives me the opportunity to emphasize something that is very, very important. Some people object to teaching a primer level of Greek, and the saying that is often passed around is, a little knowledge is dangerous. And as I say in the introduction to my textbook, Greek for the Rest of Us, it's not a little knowledge that is dangerous, it's a little arrogance, it's a little lack of humility that is dangerous. I am only able in this primer series to give you the bare bones of what's going on in the Greek language. And as I said initially, I'm not teaching you enough Greek so you can pick up the Greek and just read it. But I should emphasize, I'm not giving you enough Greek so that you can argue with commentaries. And I'm certainly not giving you enough Greek so that you can come up with your own original interpretations of verses. That is far beyond the scope of the Greek primer series, all right? When you see this, and you see translations translating tauta as the subject of prostithesetai, in humility, you say, oh, this is one of those things that I don't know. What you don't say is, hey, they got it wrong. Okay, it's just really important that you understand that. The rule in Greek is that when the subject is neuter plural, when the author is thinking of that neuter plural as an entity, in other words, all these things, not individually, but all these things as a group, then you can use a singular verb to emphasize that. So this is some of the fine-tuning that will happen in Church Greek and in Functional Greek, the other two video series. And it's the kind of stuff that we spend a lot of time in second-year Greek when we're doing it traditionally. But that's what's going on here. But I wanted to use this as an example just to encourage humility on your part. Translations always have a reason for doing what they do. I don't think I've ever seen a random translation, whether it's the NASB or the ESV or the NIV or the NET or the Holman Christian or the NLT. There's always a reason. And the people who do those translations know a lot more about Greek, if you don't mind me saying it this way. They know a lot more about Greek than you do. And so a little bit of humility is a good thing. So what we're doing positively is learning enough Greek to make better use of the tools. And that's a really, really good thing. And perhaps to start develop an appreciation for the task of translations. What we're not doing is teaching you enough Greek so that you can argue with translations and commentaries, okay? The other important thing that I should point out here, though, is that panta isn't the subject. Panta is an adjective, and it's modifying tauta. Jesus is not saying all things will be given to you. This is not prosperity gospel kind of stuff. There's no promise that we're going to be given everything, but it's all of these things. And what we're going to learn in Church Greek is that tauta is a pronoun, and pronouns have antecedents. They have something they refer back to. And what does tauta refer back to? Well, it doesn't refer back to expensive cars and elaborate houses. It refers back to food and clothing, right? And what Jesus is saying is that if we, above all other things, that's what proton is. So if we, above everything else, seek not for the things of ourselves, but for the things of God, if we seek for the things that are of His kingdom, and if we seek for His righteousness, if that is our priority, then incidental things like food and clothing will simply be given to us. This is called, by the way, a divine passive, again, more functional Greek stuff, because who's doing the giving? It's God who's doing the giving. And so grammarians call this a divine passive. Let me leave you with this note then. Zeteta is what part of speech? It's an imperative, isn't it? This is not Jesus' idea where we have the option to say, oh, I agree or I disagree. But this is Jesus, the Son of God, issuing an imperative, issuing a command. And disciples of Jesus Christ only have two options at this point. One is to obey, and by the power of the Spirit in ever-increasing ways seek first above all things God's kingdom. Or we can choose to be disobedient. But this is not an optional kind of verse. This is not just an idea we can discuss. It is an imperative and a promise. Above all things, we are to seek the things of God. And we can do so with the assuredness that it is God who is going to give us the things we need to live. A good note to end our screencast on.